So I'm at Design Indaba. I'm sitting with Ekene Ijeoma, who's a Brooklyn-based. How do you classify yourself? How
I
do you
just say
define
I'm an
yourself?
artist and designer.
An artist and designer.
Yeah.
And how did you come to artist, to being an artist? Because I see you have a degree in information technology.
Mm-hmm. And also a master's in interaction design.
So how did you what brought you to information technology as a starting point?
Well, I think my Nigerian immigrant parents brought me to information technology because that's what they understood as something that I could make a living off of. But as soon as I left school, I went into design. I worked for a design studio in New York for a year, and then I worked for some ad agencies for about 8 years, doing everything from music videos and commercials to websites and installations.
And is that how you then made that transition in doing your master's in interactive design?
No, how that happened was I got a scholarship. I won a competition and got a scholarship to study. Actually, I studied in Milan, in Italy. And I wanted to also live in Europe, so it was a good opportunity for me to go out there and learn design from that perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, for the layperson, what is interactive design?
Interaction design is everything between the human and how they interact with technology. So that could be a lot of things. It could be between you and how you interact with your phone, you and how you interact with any screen-based technology. It could be you and how you interact with the world. Now devices aren't so. Now computing isn't just device-based. It's actually, we're talking city scale now. So there's different ways to design the interaction around that too. And moreover, throughout the years, I've become more interested in cities and people.
I mean, one of the interesting projects that you've done is the lookup one. Mm-hmm. Where in society it's a problem. It's a global problem, where we spend our days kind of with our necks cricked and staring down at phones.
Yeah.
And I can imagine in cities like particularly cities like New York. I mean, I live in Johannesburg, and Johannesburg we drive everywhere, so there's the added risk of me actually driving into people. Mm-hmm. But in cities where you spend a lot of time walking,
especially
you bump into people, you bump into walls. So give us some background on that project and how you went about it. So you're kind of your starting point, and then how you went about it and what you developed it.
Yeah, so that project just came from people watching and just seeing so many people looking down at their phones in New York City, in public spaces. For me, a public space is where you're supposed to embrace the diversity of the city and the serendipity of the city. And I feel like the phone takes away a lot of that, especially in New York City. I mean, not seeing people's eyes on the street almost makes it feel like a lonely city. Like when you're the only one looking up and you don't see anyone.
You see basically people's foreheads and the top of people's heads.
It's like, where am I? You could be anywhere really, and any of those people looking down at their phones could be anywhere. Yeah. So, phones and technology in general has connected us at the same time, but it's distanced us from each other as well.
So, what does the project look like? I mean,
so,
what is it exactly?
So, at the moment, it was commissioned by Google Creative Lab for their Android Experiments program. And so the first prototype, the first release was for Androids only. Okay. And it has, Android has this feature called the live wallpaper. So the app itself actually runs in the background. Okay. So it runs in the home screen, and anytime you walk into an intersection, these eyeballs pop up. And if you're in an app, notifications pop up. Yeah. And no matter what, every time it vibrates.
So essentially, it's once you get to an intersection, is making sure that you don't just step into the road.
Yeah, and it's also a way of creating opportunities for reconnecting with the people around you. Because intersections, right? They connect streets and roads, but they can also connect people. And that's sort of the idea, is at every intersection, we say around every corner there's something new. At every intersection of New York City, there's something new.
Yeah.
And what are you missing out on when you're going to these intersections and, you know,
Staring down
at your phone, you know? So it's more about embracing, you know, embracing diversity and serendipity. Those are sort of the ideas, and creating empathy. If you're not looking at the people around you, how can you feel empathetic to them? If you're not seeing the people on a street level, on an eye-to-eye level, then how do you relate to those people? They could be your neighbors.
Yeah.
And you don't even know them because, you know, you're on your phone all the time.
Another project that I found interesting was the diversity project, and you know, because for South Africa in particular, you know, the reality is that our media, advertising, design industries tend to be overwhelmingly white. In you know, in a country that is majority black, and it's tied to the history and it's tied to some of the struggles. But unpack that project a little bit, just in terms of what, you know, you're commissioned to do it and what you're looking to achieve.
So I could have done anything. I could have done it on, you know, the wage gap, you know, for women in design as well. But, you know, me being black and in design, and even throughout the 8 years that I worked in the commercial space, I think I've only worked with 2 black designers. And, you know, that's when you think about that, when I have to acknowledge that, and then when there's the data that also says that, then I felt like I had to do a project on it. And it's great because the data itself is really, really simple. I had 4 numbers, and that was the percentage of the percentages of each ethnicity in the design community and within the U.S. And I wanted to just create some sort of mirror where the design industry could look at itself. And so the way I did that was to create a website, which is a webcam. And so when everyone goes to this website, the first thing they see are themselves, with you know, the text that says white overlaid. And that's the sharpest image you'll see, because white, it's the design industry is 73% white in the US, and also in Europe, because the organization also expands into Europe. So, and then as you click through the filters, it goes from Hispanic, gets more blurry, Asian, more blurry, black, completely blurry. And it was just I felt like it was a really simple way to just say, like, this is what it is. Now we have the data. Before, there was no baseline. So it's great that AIGA did that census, that survey, because now there is a baseline. We've been saying that there was a lack of diversity in design before, but we didn't have the data. And I think nowadays, like, people really want to see the data. They want proof that this is an issue.
But also, once we've held up that mirror, what do you feel should be the next steps?
The next steps, AIGA themselves, they actually have a diversity and inclusion task force. So they're actively trying to look for ways to bring more people of color into design. So yeah, and it's it's a nationwide organization. So they have chapters in every state, and multiple chapters in a state sometimes. So in each one of those chapters, I think there's a diversity inclusion task force.
So you kind of play in multiple spaces and on multiple platforms, and I know from an artistic perspective, there's a whole bunch of work you do there as well. I mean, what are some of the exhibitions, etc., that you've been involved with?
Oh, that's a good point. I mean, the Refugee Project was the first project that really sort of bring me into that world. It was exhibited at it got nominated for Design Museum's Design of the Year award, and also it was in the exhibition as well. It was in the Istanbul Design Biennial. It was in, just last year, it was in 2 exhibitions, Neuberger Museum of Art, and also the Annenberg Space for Photography in LA. And also it was in MoMA's Design and Violence project. So that was the project that first brought me into that world. I didn't know that it would span so many sort of worlds. It was in when when it got published in multiple articles, it was in art, design, architecture, and then national and international news in multiple languages. And that's when I saw the strength of using design specifically to talk about social issues, to raise awareness around social issues.
How do you decide on projects? I mean, there's the stuff you're commissioned for, but there's also the stuff
I
that
just
you work
align
on.
myself with different organizations that I feel like are doing good things, and also individuals as well, and movements. And when the time is right, I do something. I'm not reactive in a way. It's just whenever it feels intuitive to say something, that idea has to be intuitive. Like I felt like the ethnic filter was really intuitive. I felt like Wage Islands was really intuitive. And I feel like Lookup is intuitive also. And the interesting thing about it, when you do things intuitively, is the timing.
Yeah.
The Refugee Project came out in 2014. That's 2 years before the European refugee crisis.
Yeah.
Lookup came out 2 weeks before Pokemon Go. So there's just a way of there's a lot of foresight in doing things intuitively.
Yeah.
Like I don't always have to do something when something happens, but I will eventually do something when I feel like I have something to say.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much for your time.
Cool.
That's been an interview with Ekene Ijeoma. He's a Brooklyn-based artist and designer. And this is the last day of Design Indaba, so I hope you're going to enjoy all the content that we have.